Good morning, afternoon, or evening, whichever one you prefer. And welcome to the Five Food Friends podcast. Let's sound off. I'm Aiden Darnlin.
I'm Marshall Baxter.
I'm Drew Nizelak.
I'm Matthew Harris.
I'm Leif Anderson.
So, Christianity is the world's number one religion. It's a major influence over much of the Western Hemisphere, especially the United States. But just how influential is it? How do modern companies leverage religion? And are you the unwilling victim of some good old-fashioned corporate propaganda? Let's talk about that. Now, to understand where we are today with Christianity and food, it's important to know where we came from. Being Jewish, and Judaism being the precursor to Christianity, I thought I'd talk a little bit about kosher law. Now, kosher law is a set of dietary restrictions with a number of possible origins. The first is in ethics. One of the kosher laws says that milk and meat should not be mixed together, with the idea that you shouldn't stew a child in their mother's milk, and that's definitely an ethical complaint. There's also the practice of draining all blood from a kill, because in order to do so, you have to kill the animal in a way that is more humane and is a much faster and less painful death. There's also the idea of cleanliness. Some animals, religiously, are just considered unclean by God. This can also be more literal. Certain types of fat are unhealthy, and there are some ideas in Judaism that you should only eat certain holy meals in a clean environment with clean people. And then there's a more communal and spiritual idea. By having a set of religious laws related to how you eat and what you eat, you create a more communal identity, and you also elevate food from a purely instinctual activity to more of a spiritual one. With this idea of community, by having a set of food laws, you inherently create the system of Judaism versus non-Judaism. It's very hard to marry someone, for example, who eats in an entirely different way than you do. And by making sure that people eat different ways, you've elevated them above animals. Animals don't care what they eat, there are no rules. But by making sure that people have different rules, there's a noticeable difference. But the overall origin for this is just from nothing. Kosher falls under a set of laws called chalk, which means to engrave in stone or boundaries. It's a set of laws that don't come from any logical reason, just because God said so. There is no inherent logical origin behind much of kosher law, it just is, because that is how God said it was supposed to be.
There had to be some sort of connection between kosher eating practices and modern Christianity eating practices, and we see that divide in the difference between the Old Testament and the New Testament. In Leviticus 11, an Old Testament book, the Bible says, "The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, 'Say to the Israelites, of all the animals that live on land, these are the ones you may eat. You may eat any animal that has a split hoof completely divided and that chews the cud.'" That clearly shows some eating rules that people must follow according to the Bible and according to God. There's a difference in the New Testament book of Acts chapter 10. The Bible says, "A voice told him, 'Get up, Peter, kill and eat.' 'Surely not, Lord,' Peter replied. 'I have never eaten anything impure or unclean.' The voice spoke to him a second time, 'Do not call anything impure that God has made clean.'" Under the assumption that God made everything on this earth, all of the animals and all the plants, God is saying now that Christians may eat anything. There are no unclean animals or unclean foods.
Now, could this be a way to make Christianity easier to convert to? I know that with Judaism and kosher, it's a major issue with people trying to convert because they have to give up a lot of foods that they're used to eating. A lot of kosher laws seem overly restrictive. For example, no pork, when pork is such a major part of human diet. So could this change be a way to make Christianity more easily applied to more people?
I think it definitely could be a way that Christianity could be applied to more people. I mean, people generally do not like to act under more laws than they have to. And so the Jewish eating laws of kosher make it more difficult to live and more difficult to eat. So the actual event that makes this connection between Judaism and Christianity is Jesus. And the difference between Judaism and Christianity is that Christians believe that Jesus is the Son of God, while Jews believe he is simply a prophet. In the Bible, it says that when Jesus was on the cross and declared, "It is finished," a veil tore from the bottom to the top, and that destroyed the ways of the Old Testament and created a new covenant that Jesus was to control. What Jesus said went. That being said, eating practices did not go away.
So now that we have some good insight on the practices of early Christians in relation to food, I want to transition to some of the modern food practices in relation to Christianity. To give some context on why I can speak on this topic, I want to talk about myself a little bit. Prior to coming to this fine institution known as Georgia Tech, I went to Catholic school for 6 years. We had priests, uniforms, mass, Easter breaks, the whole shebang. And I think I got a pretty good feel for a lot of the modern Christian food practices, as well as the attitudes of both teachers and students towards those practices. To highlight this, I want to talk about Lent. Lent is a period of 40 days during the Easter season where a lot of Christian food practices change. At the start of Lent, there is Ash Wednesday, and at the end, there is Good Friday. On both of those days, Catholics are expected to fast. However, a lot of the Catholics that I observed did not really adhere to these restrictions. Throughout those 40 days, on every Friday, Catholics are expected to change their diets and abstaining from eating meat during these times. What I observed from a lot of the students, however, was very different. Most of them did not adhere to these practices and instead kept on going along eating their regular diets. This was very different to what the teachers wanted us to do. The teachers seemed to be very strict in how they ate during Lent, but this was very different from the students, which shows a very big difference between generation to generation.
So why do you think this generational divide exists? Why do the younger generations not follow those kinds of food laws as much as the older generations try to?
I think part of it has to do with a lot of the students not wanting to be suffocated by some of these restrictions, but also they like to be a little bit rebellious.
I think it's also important to note, I came from a Protestant family and grew up Protestant, but fasting was still a practice that we used even though there was no law that told us to do so. And it wasn't used as much by the younger generations as it was by older people as they became more developed in their faith. Personally, I've used fasting to grow closer to God and increase my personal growth as opposed to any law telling me to do so.
So more as like kind of a form of respect, a mature kind of respect towards God.
Right, for sure.
Well, like you, Leaf, I also come from a religious background. I recently had lunch with a friend. We both attended a private Christian school. We were both raised Roman Catholic. And I described my move to Atlanta as a bit of a culture shock. We both came from a town where most of the community is Christian, and I was interested to know the demographic of Atlanta. According to the Pew Research Center, 76% of Atlanta residents identify as Christian. Did any of you guys have a similar experience with your first taste of Atlanta culture, or were you surprised by the role Christianity had?
I saw an interesting connection with food and Christianity around Tech Campus. There were multiple student organizations that were Christian-run that used food as a way to draw in people. I know one student organization has pancakes on Sundays, and that is a Christian group. So it's interesting to see the connection between food and promoting and sharing religion.
Absolutely. And my personal experience with Christianity in Atlanta is Chik-FIl-A. I worked at Chik-FIl-A for a year, and I have the privilege of being in a relationship with the Ragsdale family, and more namely Brent Ragsdale. For some of our viewers who might not know who that is, Brent Ragsdale is the CFO of Chik-FIl-A. So in my personal experience with the company, during our training, we're taught to care for our customers, not in a way of just efficiently getting them out the door, but in a way of wanting to know them more, in a way of making sure that their day is better by coming into our restaurant. And I think this flies in the face of a company that is just here for the financial gain of things. Not only this, but it's detrimental to the financial vehicle for a business to want to even care about their customers. And I say that, and it sounds cruel or it sounds rash, but it's also true if we want to get customers in the door efficiently. With my time with the Ragsdales and interviewing the Ragsdale family, they wanted to point out mainly that Chik-FIl-A is owned by active, loving Christians and also people who are not in the Christian belief but also have different beliefs, but they also love their customers and they love their staff just as much as anyone would. Brent Ragsdale wanted to point out that it wouldn't be in Chik-FIl-A's financial interest to use these Christian values, mainly the issue of being off on Sundays. Sunday is a traditional rest day in the Christian belief structure. And with this Sunday being off, they're losing millions of dollars in revenue every day. And then also the fact that when we try and care about these customers and get to know them, it is also detrimental in revenue as we're not being totally efficient. But I believe that this system of wanting to care for our customers and caring for those that come in through our door, it brings people back. And I think that's a big motive to our vehicle. Not only is it just for the quick money, it's in it for caring about the people who come through our doors.
Yeah, I think it's important there that you noted how the ways of Chick-fil-A keep the people coming back. And while I agree with you that Chick-fil-A may not be in it just for the quick buck, their business model is successful, and it has proven to be successful. I know personally, when I'm thinking about a place that I want to go eat on a Saturday afternoon, I would prefer the place that I know is going to treat me well, such as Chick-fil-A, rather than another option where I might have iffy service.
Absolutely, and this is even further outlined in the ACSI poll, which, for those of you who may not know, the ACSI poll is a poll where 25,000 consumers from all around the United States all vote on various things about restaurants. And for the fourth year in a row, Chick-fil-A has been voted the best customer satisfaction in this poll by a large margin above the competition.
So it's almost fair to say that Chick-fil-A is using Christian ideas for money, in just that being kind and caring to your customers is a solid business strategy.
Absolutely, and I think this is further outlined in that I think it's a wonderful strategy that they use not the money as the first factor for their business strategy, but they use the care and love for their consumers to bring people back. And I think that's a great way that they use that, is that money is always second, family is always first.
Exactly. Chick-fil-A can help that loving thy neighbor as thyself is a really good business model.
So, we've talked and you've listened. Christian dietary practices have found their way into everything from high schools to fast food. And Chick-fil-A probably isn't trying to use Christians to turn a quick buck. But the general problem is worth considering. Not all corporate actions are from the good of their heart. And in a world that's been dominated by Christianity for centuries, it's hard to find anything that hasn't been touched by it. Stay alert and stay aware. This has been the 5 Food Friends podcast. Thank you.